Hi, and welcome to History Makers. I'm Matt Prater. Today we're chatting with Des Kennedy from Momentum Australia. How are you, my friend?
I'm really good. It's great to be here, man. It's really good.
Now, people might notice the Irish accent. We always like to start out finding people's background. Tell us, where were you born and raised, my friend?
Well, I was born in a little city called Belfast,
Okay.
which is famous for not so many good things, but yeah, so I was born in the centre of Belfast and grew up there until I came to Australia in 1981.
And did you have a religious upbringing, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I did. I did. Well, yeah, I wouldn't assume that, but my dad was a street preacher.
Really?
Yeah, he was
Okay.
a street preacher. And my next brother to me was a Baptist pastor all his life.
Okay.
And my youngest brother was a Christian all his life. My sister, who passed away last year, was Christian all her life. And then there was this bloke called Des, who was the prodigal son in every sense of the word.
Really? Okay, okay.
Well, I left Ireland to get away from that whole influence.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it was very religious. And so, I mean, I had great parents, great family. But I just thought I wanted to get away from that and do my own thing.
Okay. And so when you left, were you kind of like, I don't want to, I want to run as far away from God as possible? Was that kind of where you're at?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when I said I didn't want to get involved with any churches, I didn't want to have anything to do with Christians. In fact, one of the interesting things is, in my career, I often had employees or people who worked for me who were Christians.
Right.
And they were the most difficult people to manage.
Yeah, yeah.
I think we can talk about that if you want. But yeah, I find them very difficult
That's
to
interesting,
manage.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting.
So tell us a bit about your career. So what did you first do when you finished school?
So I finished school. I was going to go to university. I wasn't particularly bright. I was pretty average. I had the opportunity to go to uni, but I got the opportunity to go into banking. And I was a programmer, computer programmer in its infancy in Belfast, and I became a programmer in the bank. And I stayed in the information technology field all my life. So when I came to Australia in 81, I was actually what they call a DP manager, which is data processing manager, looking after a wholesale business in Belfast. I was also a part-time policeman in Belfast, which was sort of fun, walking around the streets with a Sterling submachine gun. That was a bit of fun.
Right, okay.
And so that, then eventually my wife and I decided to go to Australia. We were thinking about Canada and Australia, but Canada had its worst winter in 25 years. So we said, no, let's not go there. Let's go somewhere sunny. And so we arrived in Sydney on the 18th of March, 1981.
Now, you've worked for a number of well-known businesses. Tell us some of the organisations you've worked for.
Well, I was so fortunate to join NRMA. And so all the people in Sydney and who get road service, I was responsible for all the technology that ran road service and all the communications and eventually all the systems that ran NRMA. And then I got headhunted to Qantas and same sort of role, head of all technology, building and supplying technology all around the world. And then I had a stint with Deutsche Bank in Singapore for a year, helping them through the year 2000, and then came back to Sydney. Ended up going to New Zealand for 8 years, working with the biggest company in New Zealand called Fonterra.
Okay.
And I headed up all their technology as well. So yeah, not bad for an Irishman from Belfast.
So you had a very successful career over the years.
Yeah.
And tell us about your faith journey, because it wasn't until later in life that you came to Christ.
Well, I guess I made the decision when I was in Ireland that I really didn't want to be involved with Christianity. It's funny, when you look back, I always found it much more logical to believe in a God than to believe there was no God. So divine order, the way our universe is, for me, it was logical to believe there was a God. What I didn't believe was the Christian version of God. Because when you look at Christians, well, I think it was J. John who said there's two reasons why people haven't come to Christ yet. One of them is they haven't met a Christian. And the second reason is they have met a Christian. and there's an awful lot of truth to that. But yeah, so I was just getting on with my life. I was involved in different projects. In about 2009, I just came back from New Zealand, and I was sort of thinking of semi-retiring and just just chilling out a bit. But I got a call to take on a major project for the Northern Territory government. And as part of that project, I was based up in Darwin. I got to know all these people who work for all the shire councils in the Northern Territory after they merged them all. And one of the shire councils in Alice Springs had a lady called Gwen Gouveia. And Gwen, the first time I set eyes on her, I knew she was a Christian. I could tell. I used to say I could smell them a mile off. So sorry about that if that offends people, but yeah. So she was a wonderful example of non-judgmental Christianity. Oozed the love of God, loved Jesus, just amazing. And so one day she said to me, we were driving out to community, she said, Des, can I put my music on? And I said, yeah, of course, and I'm a gentleman. Of course you can. I said, put on Hillsong Music. And I'd never listened to Hillsong Music.
Really?
I knew who Hillsong was,
Yeah.
but I'd never listened to the music. And I was amazed at how good, from a secular point of view, the music was. But also the words started to strike a chord with me. And a bit of time passed, and then she said to me, Des, I read the Bible every night. And I said, so you should. It's your job. You're a Christian. That's what you're meant to do. It comes with the territory. He said, no, that's not what I mean. He said, what I'd like to do is for you to read the Bible with me. And I said, Gwen, been there, done that, wore the T-shirt, seen the movie, not interested. But if it helps you, then I'll do it. And so she'd go to my hotel room, I'd go to hers, and we'd sit and we'd read the Bible. And during that process, I decided to re-explore Christianity. And try and find out who God really is, as opposed to what I thought he was. And so the following weekend, I was down in Sydney, went along to Hillsong Church at Baulkham Hills. And because I'd been listening to the music, I actually really felt at home. And Sangers, the pastor in Hillsong, was speaking, and he was really good preacher.
A very Aussie preacher, Sanger.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Scott
right.
Sanger Samways is his name.
That's exactly right. And so he was preaching. And so I actually put my hand up, not to become a Christian, but just to get some of the pastors to pray for me as I went on this journey. And so, yeah, that process continued. And then on the 14th of March 2011, I drove out of Catherine in the Northern Territory to drive to Tennant Creek. And I pulled into a picnic area, parked under a tree, and I said, God, you've got to show me what I need to do. And I knew people say they hear God's voice, but it wasn't an audible voice, but I knew it was from God. And the voice said, Des, you don't need to do anything. It's all been done. What you've got to do is find a little bit of faith and put it in what Jesus has done for you and repent for how you've lived. And it's all done.
Wow.
And I made that decision at that point.
Yeah. So 2011.
Yeah.
And you're in your 50s then.
Late 50s, 58.
Late 50s,
yeah. That tells you how old I am.
Yeah. Tell me, how did your life change after that?
Oh, dramatically. Totally dramatically. So my marriage fell apart, so that was because my wife hated Christians as much as I had done.
Wow.
And that was my second marriage, so that fell apart. I then went to Alice Springs, spent about a year and a half at Alice Springs with a group of people I knew, Christian people. And then I really didn't know what God wanted me to do, so I went to stay with my son in Brisbane. And so, because I associated with Hillsong Church, I joined Hillsong Church, and then decided to become a chaplain, which I am, and then decided to go to Bible college because I couldn't make the connection between talking to people in a pastoral sense as a chaplain and scripture. Those two have to go together, right? And so coming to faith late in life, I find it very hard to know Christian verses, whereas probably you can quote them all off their tongue, which is fantastic. I'm so jealous of people who can do that. But the... so I did that, and it was interesting because at the time I was going to the first service on the Sunday morning, 7:45 service, and the couple who had been the service pastors, they were burnt out. They'd just been there so long, and so one of the pastors came to me and said, Des, look, would you step in as the service pastor, for a few weeks till we find somebody? I think 3.5, 4 years later, I was still service pastor. And that was just a job I loved. And during that time, I also established men's ministry. And you would think that Hillsong, being a progressive church, being an active church, would have a very active men's ministry. They didn't. And so we ended up with 63 men's groups
Wow.
across southeast Queensland.
Yeah.
It's fishing groups, all sorts of groups for men, just to help them connect. And that led ultimately to Momentum.
Fantastic. Now let's just backtrack. You said you were doing chaplaincy work. What kind of chaplaincy work were you doing?
I did various things. There was a flour mill in downtown Brisbane, I think it's still there, and also a sister flour mill out at Toowoomba. And so I went there and I was their resident chaplain. There was a lot of friction in the company, and so they asked for a chaplain. I went in and I just walked around the plant, talked to people, and I loved it.
Yeah.
And my biggest ally in that walk around was a Muslim guy.
Wow, there you
Because
go.
he identified me as a comrade for him, in the sense that we shared a lot of values, family values, all those sort of things. So it was really cool. I loved doing that.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So let's get back to Momentum. So I love Momentum. I listen to it all the time. I love that you've got a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
I love that you've interviewed all these incredible people, and it's on 45 radio stations around Australia and around the world. People listen through the
And
podcast.
Vision Christian Media,
Vision
of course.
Media, yeah, all these different stations play it. So tell us a bit about why you do Momentum.
Well, it's quite clear. It's let me give you a statistic first of all, and this comes out of America, and it is, if a child comes to Christ, the likelihood of that whole family coming to Christ is about 35%. If a wife mother comes to Christ, the likelihood of that whole family coming to Christ rises to 58%. I think these statistics right, but the key one is, if a man comes to Christ, a father or a husband comes to Christ, the likelihood of that whole family coming to Christ rises to 87%.
Wow.
Right. So if you're going to market from a church point of view, where's your target market? Is it with the women and the flowers and the altar and all that sort of stuff? Is it at kids' church? All those things are important, but from my book, we should be targeting men. The church needs to target men. Get men in community. Get men connected. Get men serving God. Get men being disciples, evangelizing, all the things that are dear to your heart and dear to mine. And that's what we do. We're all about helping men to do life better in every sphere of their life. So, we talk about pornography, we talk about prostate cancer, we talk about heart health, we talk about anxiety and depression and suicide, because we all know there are terrible statistics around men taking their own lives. It's actually interesting that more women attempt suicide, but men are much more successful.
Wow.
It's an interesting statistic. And I've come across that, with men in my world who, after becoming a Christian, who were part of the men's community, but just they weren't engaged enough for people to help them stop them taking their lives. So it's crazy. So that's why we do Momentum, helping men, and we get amazing feedback. But it's about getting guys connected, guys listening to the show. Anybody, I mean, even wives, encourage your husband to get out there and find a close mate that he can confide in, that he can be honest with, that he can talk through his world with. Because I have those. I'm sure, Matt, you have those, and so that's okay. So that's what Momentum's about.
And I even caught up with a bloke a while back who had listened to your show and was looking for a good men's group.
Yeah.
And he contacted you.
Yeah.
And you said, oh, yeah, go and see Matt, So we caught up and he came to our men's group,
Oh,
because
great.
blokes need community, don't they?
Absolutely. It's okay.
This is the problem. So many guys are fighting these battles on their own and, to their detriment.
Yeah.
We need each other, don't we?
That's exactly right. And, it doesn't, it is better if they connect with a Christian men's group, because then you got your faith aspect of it too. But guys, anybody, connect to a men's shed, connect to, there's one in Port Macquarie where I live called Self Seen, and this is a group of guys who go walking every weekend. And there's always guys in that mix who are struggling with something in their world, because we all do. And so just get yourself to the point. And what we say is, it's better to find a friend and a confidant before you get into trouble, because you'll not find that person after you get into trouble, because your head will be in a totally different space. So find them right now.
Brilliant. Love it. Now, if people want to find out more, what's the website?
So momentumaustralia.org, and we've got all the previous podcasts are on there. There's lots of other YouTube stuff on there. Yeah, great website. So we encourage you to do that. You can find us on YouTube, search for Momentum for Men, and on TikTok search for Momentum for Men, and you'll find us all there.
Do you do TikTok dances on your TikTok?
We could get some comments. Yeah.
You could, yeah.
Yeah. No, TikTok's amazing. It really is
yeah.
good. So every single day we have hundreds of people reach out or
Right.
at least watch our videos on
Yeah, great.
TikTok.
Fantastic. Well, Des, it's been so good to catch up with you, mate. I'm a big fan of Momentum.
Thank you.
Pray that many lives are impacted. I reckon you're a history maker. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.